Hello there, my name is Andrew Scowcroft. I run my own training and consultancy company, but I've also worked for the National Health Service in England and Wales since 1973. So I bring to this session a combination of NHS management experience, but also experience of working in the private sector. The session that I'm going to cover with you today is all about organisational culture and how, if you diagnose the right culture and then adapt your approach accordingly, you stand more of a chance of getting a yes to whatever proposal you're putting forward. And as general practitioners, you're probably aware that when you deal with the Health Board or the Welsh Government or the UK Government or perhaps a local authority, you probably find yourself thinking, these guys are speaking a different language, they're doing things in a different way. That's true, but the way they do things works for them. And therefore, if you want to get them on board with your ideas, then you are going to have to be the ones that adapt your influencing approach accordingly. So imagine for a moment, have you ever come back from a meeting with somebody outside your profession or a group of managers from another organisation and thought to yourself, what's wrong with these people? Why didn't they get it? I couldn't have been clearer. My case makes perfect sense. Were they being deliberately difficult on purpose? The answer is no. What you've encountered is two things. You've encountered a culture which is different from yours. And secondly, you have probably fallen into the trap of trying to sell your idea to them as if they thought and acted the way you and your profession does. And what happens when you fall into that trap is not only do you lose the argument because you're not making sense to them, you also lose your credibility for next time. Because the next time you come into that room trying to influence them, you will inevitably bring the baggage of, you people didn't get what I was saying last time, there must be something wrong with you, and that leaks out in the way you influence. So when I talk about organisational culture in the next few minutes, what I mean is just the way those people do things in their organisation. One of the frustrations when you're dealing with organisational culture is it's not written down anywhere. There'll be no document that you can go to which says call Fred by his surname rather than his first name because that's the way he likes it. There'll be no manual which says write your business cases using these words but please don't use those words. So to a certain extent you have to be savvy in the way you do your research as to what sort of culture you're dealing with. And what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is give you a model of organisational culture which allows you to then go looking when you're dealing with other professions and other departments, looking for clues as to how they prefer to operate and then adapting and adopting new approaches so that you can be more influential in the future. So our model this morning, or the model today, looks at 4 organisational culture types. And just to make the exercise a little more memorable, each cultural type has been given the name of a Greek or a Roman mythical god. In our case, there are 4: Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus. And in case you needed it to be made even more memorable, each of those cultural types also has an image associated with it, and you'll see those images on the screen. For Zeus, it is a spider's web. For Apollo, it is a Greek or a Roman temple front. For Athena, it is a grid or a matrix. And for Dionysus, the best way of describing it is an amorphous blob, apparently with no shape or form. The reason for the names and the reason for the images will come clear as I work through them. So imagine a Zeus culture. In a Zeus culture, there is one central power figure. Everybody knows that Zeus is in charge, and of course Zeus could well be female, so don't fall into the trap of thinking this is a male-dominated culture. So in a Zeus culture, one central figure sitting in the middle of that spider's web. Power radiates out from the centre of the spider's web. So if you can imagine the spider's web as more of a power distribution diagram, the further away from the centre you are, the less influence you have. It's got nothing to do with your job description or your seniority, it's just whether or not you are currently close to and favoured by the central Zeus figure, or whether you have displeased the Zeus figure and are therefore sent to the boondocks, to the periphery of the diagram. Everything in a Zeus culture is done the way Zeus wants it. If Zeus doesn't think something is a good idea, it doesn't get done. It doesn't even get talked about. You will find meetings and conversations are normally short, and they're one way. Zeus calls the shots. One of the other things that you'll find in a Zeus culture is there will tend to be an inner circle. Now that inner circle may be quite sycophantic, they may well be quite orientated towards yes Zeus, no Zeus, this sort of thing. But they may well actually be quite feisty in their own right. The difference is they have earned the right to be in that inner circle because they have delivered Zeus's agenda the way Zeus wants it. Unfortunately, in a Zeus culture, you can find that you can be in favour one minute and out of favour the next, without ever really knowing what you did to deserve either of those two accolades. So you can be very, very senior in a Zeus culture, but still not be at any of the key meetings, simply because Zeus has marginalised you. You can also be the prodigal son or daughter welcomed back into the Zeus family for something which you might think is quite trivial, but has pleased the central Zeus figure. Committees, paperwork, anathema to Zeus. Let's just get the job done my way. So think of this culture as having a central power figure and a spider's web as its diagram. Because when we come to looking at the clues and how you then move forward and influence that culture, those images will be relevant to you. So if that's a Zeus culture, let's look now at the culture we call Apollo. The reason we've chosen the god Apollo is that they were the god of logic, order and reason. And the temple image looks remarkably like the way most bureaucracies draw their organisation chart. So a central pyramid and functional columns containing all of the different departments. And in an Apollo culture, what is hated is risk. It's just the opposite in a Zeus culture. Zeus likes risk as long as they're the ones that are getting the praise and the celebration when it goes well, and that they have somebody else to blame when it goes wrong. But in an Apollo culture, it's all about let's do things carefully, let's think about them a lot, let's not act hastily, because in an Apollo culture, a hasty decision is almost always the wrong decision and a risky decision. So in an Apollo culture, you'll find the language quite impersonal. People in that culture will talk to each other and about each other by their titles, by their job titles, and sometimes by the initials of their job titles. So if you're in the Welsh Government talking to the office of the Chief Medical Officer, don't expect them to be calling the Chief Medical Officer by their name. They will mention Chief Medical Officer or even CMO. In an Apollo culture, everything is done by consultation, committee, paperwork, with a strong emphasis on evidence. Several years ago, I did a piece of work for the predecessor of the Welsh Government, the Welsh Office, and as a management consultant, I did a report for them. At the end, they came back to me and said, "We like your report, but it's too short. Can you make it longer?" What they wanted was a document that demonstrated weight, both not just physical weight, but gravitas. You would not see that or even hear those words spoken in a Zeus culture. So in an Apollo culture, it's all about committees, plans, strategies, evidence, data, thinking, consultation. All the things that must drive you medics mad because everything takes so long. But it works in an Apollo culture. Apollo cultures are very, very good at setting something to a particular standard, perhaps a work process, and then repeating that day after day after day to the same standard. That makes them very slow to change, but once they have changed, they will proceduralize that new change so that they can carry on with the new process in the same quality standard until it needs changing again. So, just to recap, we've got the Zeus culture, which is all about central power, mercurial behavior, Zeus doing things on the basis of what appeals to him or her, and the whole department following suit if they want to stay alive. And an Apollo culture, which is all about bureaucracy, risk avoidance, careful analysis, option appraisal, plans, strategies, meetings. Everything takes a long time. Our third culture looks at the god Athena and takes the version of Athena which is a warring god or goddess, where it was all about let's get the team right for the task, let's equip the team, let's give them the power to self-manage, drop them over the border, let them get on with the job. If you were wanting a latter-day example of an Athena culture, it would be the SAS, where every team is assembled specifically for the task at hand. They are equipped, they are trained, they are given the power to decide locally, and then they're given the job of getting on with and finishing the task. The reason for the grid or the net or the matrix image is all about the connections between the lines. Where the connections between the lines are, those are where the problems are, so we bring the people, the equipment, the money, and the freedom to act locally together in that spot, and we equip the team to get on with the job. So in an Athena culture, what matters to the people is the task interesting? Is the task challenging? Will we have freedom to get on with the job the way we want it? Or will we be micromanaged from above? So in an Athena culture, anybody who tries to manage the team from above will leave the team demotivated and frustrated. What Athena cultures want is to be trusted that they have the skills necessary to get the job done. If you remember the last time you were maybe working in a hospital environment, you may have come across clinical directorates. Clinical directorates are an example of an Athena culture. I'm not saying they work particularly well, but in theory, that's what they're trying to do, to devolve decision-making power down to a local level. The final one of our four cultures is Dionysus. And if you remember, I said that the image that goes with it is the amorphous blob. This is because Dionysus is the culture of the self-managed, independent professional. Could be a doctor, could be an architect, an accountant, a lawyer, anybody in a high status position who has a primary obligation to the client in front of them is likely to be an example of a Dionysus culture. In mythology, Dionysus was the existentialist, the person that did not fit in, just wanted to do his or her own thing and be left alone. And that pretty much sums up the 21st century Dionysians. They expect to be valued for their professional expertise, and they don't expect anybody to manage them. You'll notice in a Dionysus culture that there are two unwritten rules. The first is, I can't tell you what to do. The second rule is, you can't tell me what to do. Now, let's work together. So you will find Dionysians, particularly within healthcare, to be extremely curious about each other's practice, often quite rude and dismissive about each other's practice, but fundamentally they have a mutual respect for each other's professionalism, but that's as far as it goes. There is no structure, hence the amorphous blob, because that's the way the members of this culture like it. They like being able to come on board with new ideas on their terms, rather than being told what to do by the system or by one of the members. So if I told you what to do, that would immediately give me some sort of management hierarchical authority, which is against the rules for a Dionysian culture. So over the years as a health service manager, I have dealt with a lot of hospital and primary care clinicians whose behaviour towards each other I have sometimes found to be grossly offensive. But they are simply just marking their territory. They are saying to their colleagues, you're entitled to do what you want, even if I think it's rubbish, but don't expect me to do that just because you tell me to. So there you have the four cultures. Zeus, which is all about central power. Apollo, which is all about plans, bureaucracy, timescale, strategy. Athena, which is all about the task, the team, and being trusted to get on with it. And finally, Dionysians, which is all about individual authority over their clinical practice and being left alone to do their own thing. Now, with any cultural model, you will find there are shades of grey. Not necessarily 50, but there are shades of grey, and you will sometimes come across an organisation which seems to have a hybrid of cultural types. But most clinicians who hear this presentation immediately recognise places they've worked before or places they do business with where, yep, I can see that was a Zeus culture at work, or yes, I can see the Dionysian tendencies there. Now go back to my original point. If you go and see somebody in another part of the hospital or the primary care field and they just don't get your idea, for the moment, don't assume they're stupid. Just assume that they're working in a different cultural world than you. Now you've spotted the clues as to which culture they may be working in, you can do something about changing your approach to match the culture that you're trying to deal with. After all, if I was coming to you and asking you to think about a new idea or possibly consider a change to your practice, the least you'd expect from me is that I talk to you in a language and in a context that fits your reality. You'd get really offended if I tried to make you see the error of your ways and come round to my way of thinking. So, let's imagine for a moment you have discovered which culture you're up against, so what do? On the screen in a moment you'll see 4 lists. 1 list for Zeus, 1 for Apollo, 1 for Athena, and 1 for Dionysus. And it simply gives you practical hints and tips on what approaches are likely to work. The first approach that's likely to work with Zeus is find out what's on his or her agenda, personal agenda now, and then make sure your idea proposal fits with that agenda. It moves forward an issue that they're already grappling with. Don't try and introduce a new problem. They'll just swat you aside. So try wherever possible to connect what you want done with something that Zeus already is thinking about doing or thinking about solving. Second thing is, don't expect that you will get any credit whatsoever. The Zeus figure is more likely to hijack the idea and take all the credit and strut his or her stuff on conference platforms saying what a brilliant idea they've had. You may be sitting in the audience seething, but that's your problem. You have to decide, do I want the credit or do I want change to happen? If you want change to happen and you're dealing with the Zeus culture, you are going to have to let them sit in the spotlight. Your presentational style to Zeus needs to be action-orientated, straight to the point, straight to features and benefits. You need to be armed with all the background data in case you are asked, but don't trail your presentation on the basis of spreadsheets and reports and 50-page documents. You'll have to wake Zeus up if you do it that way. One other thing with the Zeus culture, don't expect to get instant access to the central Zeus figure. You might have to go through the inner circle to get to Zeus, but that's no bad thing, because the inner circle know things that you won't know. They know the language to use, they know the timing, they know how to piggyback your idea with something that Zeus is worried about, and therefore sometimes Zeus inner circle people will do the influencing for you. Just give them the information and let them deal with Zeus at a time which suits them best. And you can see on the rest of the list on screen, there are other tactics that which also work with Zeus. For Apollo, the bureaucracy culture, it's the complete and utter opposite. Data, evidence. Your whole approach must be analysing why we need to move forward at all. Don't come to them with an idea. Come to them with a problem that if it's not solved will be more risky than not moving forward at all. Trail with the evidence, the data. You need to use techniques like option appraisal, which is simply a way of putting each available option side by side and analysing the pros and cons of each. So your whole approach must be professional, considered, controlled. You should also expect it to take an awful long time, more time than you normally have the patience for. But remember what I said at the start, if they don't get your way of doing things and you start criticising them for it, you will lose your case this time and you will lose your reputation next time. So put it in a document, put it in a business case. Speak to people like me who can help you structure a business case and then get it right. Many a clinician's good idea has failed not because the idea wasn't good, simply because they've presented it in the wrong form or they've disrespected the planning cycle that a health board has and insisted that something be forced into the programme long after the funding decisions have been made. So do your research, find out the systems and processes that Apollo uses and then fit in with them. You'll get much more success than lobbing grenades at the Apollo culture simply because it's too damn slow. With Athena, give them the idea, give them what you're looking for, and allow the team to organise itself. Please do not micromanage an Athena culture. My best advice is find somebody in the Athena culture who wants to run with it and allow them to handpick the team that they want to help them do it. Make the project exciting, make it challenging, make it something that will, a bit like Hercule Poirot, will stimulate the little grey cells. Don't give them the process, let them work that out for themselves. Step back, give them the space, and celebrate their achievements vocally and often. Don't keep asking for situation reports every second Tuesday. You'll squeeze all of the fun out of it for Athena and they will simply start going through the motions. So if you want Athena on board, again, you can see on screen there are a list of approaches, some of which I've not covered in this short presentation, but I hope you can get a sense that the 3 T's come into play with Athena. Trust, team, task. Give them clarity of the task, allow the team to pick itself, step back and trust them to get the job done their way. They will do it their way, but they'll get you the result you need. And finally, Dionysus, the professional culture. Remember, this culture has no concept of doing anything corporately, because corporately implies that they're able to influence or demand consistent behaviour of each other. It doesn't work. In my hospital management career, I tried for years to get hospital doctors to move together as one. They won't, and now I know why. It is the culture of the self-managed individual. So, what do you do with Dionysus? Well, what you do is you find one person who's interested in your idea and you work with them. You make no attempt to talk to the others. You certainly don't suggest to the others that this is a pilot scheme and that the rest of them will be next. Because it's interesting that Dionysians have wonderful ways of sabotaging projects. Not because they're bad, but because they don't want to be told by somebody else how they should do things. Allow the results that you're getting working with this one person to speak for themselves, because what will happen then is almost like the viral nature of the internet. The other clinicians, the other Dionysians, will not be able to help themselves looking over the garden fence and thinking, what are you doing over there? Also, expect them when they peer over the garden fence to say, that's rubbish, that'd never work, I'd never do that. Those are the guys that 2 or 3 weeks later are ringing up you or me saying, I still think it's rubbish, but will you come and talk to me about it? And that is the key with Dionysians. They decide if, when, and how they come on board with an idea. If you try and force the pace with Dionysians, the only thing they will do corporately is sabotaging. They will come together tighter than anything and they'll just swap the idea aside. And many a hospital and healthcare manager has perished when trying to influence Dionysians by simply treating them as if they had a corporate will, a corporate mind. They don't. They operate as a collection of independent professionals. Now, you already know that because you're in that culture, but a lot of my NHS management colleagues don't. Hence, I keep doing this session in order to try and educate them. So let the results speak for themselves, and the whole idea will go viral because the medics, the Dionysians, will decide how they come on board. I hope you can see by looking at these 4 lists that if you try to use any of these techniques with one of the other cultures, they would crash and burn. They would fail completely because they are customized to each culture. So let's recap. Zeus, power structure, very much power in the middle. They decide what happens. They decide who's in favor, who's not. Apollo, plans, bureaucracy, systems, structure, job titles, job descriptions, all of that is meat and drink to Apollo. Athena, it's all about the task, the team, and the trust to be left to get on with the job without interruption. And Dionysus, it's all about identifying one individual who might be interested and working with them, almost excluding everybody else unless they choose to get interested and come on board. If you get the technique right, but with the wrong culture, you will crash and burn. If you get the technique right with the right culture, your influencing success will improve. So as medics, I've got a challenge for you to finish. You're about to go and see the health board with your new idea for a new vaccination policy for the patients in your practice or your area. You've probably sat down, you've probably put some presentation slides together, you've had a chat as a group of doctors, and everybody's going, yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, you'll have them eating out of your hands with that. They won't be able to say no to this one. It's absolutely perfect. Sorry, it isn't. It makes perfect sense in your world. You need somebody that doesn't live in your world to have a look at that, and you be big enough to allow them to pick holes in it. Because somebody outside of your culture will be able to spot where you are going to go in and annoy them. If you want Apollo bureaucrats to do things that you want done, you have to learn to speak Apollo. And hopefully the slides that I've been showing on screen through this presentation will help you do that. So I wish you luck with your presentations and your influencing in the future. Remember, these 4 models don't cover every single eventuality, but more often than not, you will spot Zeus, Apollo, Athena, or Dionysus behavior. If you're sharp enough, you can spot what you're dealing with and change tack accordingly. So I wish you well with your future influencing, and thanks for watching.